Hey everyone, ahlan wa sahlan fikum. It's time for another video. Today we're going to do something a little bit more fun. I want to answer a question that is thrown around a lot with relation to Arabic, but also just languages in general. People are always wondering, what is the hardest language? Is Arabic the hardest language? What's going on? Usually the answer that's given for this is, I think, a little bit of a cop-out. It's, the language that's going to be easiest to learn or the hardest to learn is related to how close it is to the languages that you already speak. So if you speak English, then French will be easier than, say, Japanese. But I think there's a little bit more to this question, actually, and there's a lot of ways that you can break it down. So I'm going to make a little mini video series. I'm going to make 3 videos, 3 parts, answering this question of what's the hardest language. And we're going to look at 5 different languages. We're going to look at English, Spanish, French, Japanese, and Arabic. Yes, because those are the languages that I speak, so I can talk more about them, but also because I think it's a good mix. You have 3 European languages, 2 Romance, and then 2 sort of independent language families, Semitic and then the Japanese language. So I think it'll be a good mix where we can observe the different things that make languages hard versus easier, etc., etc. So the 5 criteria that we're going to talk about in these videos to examine like the difficulty of a language, so to speak, are going to be, well, first, the 4 main language skills, which are speaking, listening, reading, and writing, right? So there's a few ways that you can break these down, right? So first you have the 2 auditory and 2 visual skills. So you have speaking, listening versus reading and writing. But then you also have input versus output skills. So you language learners should know about this. Input skills are just those that don't require any production of your own, just understanding of the language, input that is coming in. So that would be listening and reading. So when you listen, you're just trying to comprehend something that is being said to you, right? And the same with reading, basically. Whereas the output skills are usually the ones that are harder to master, because output skills require you to produce, content, I guess, in that language. So it requires a lot of creative thinking and sort of off the cuff and stuff like that. So it tends to be harder, right? And that would be speaking and writing. Especially writing, tends to be considered a pretty advanced skill if you can really do it correctly. So those are the 4 language skills. And then the 5th thing that we're going to talk about is just sort of grammar and syntax, because some languages are just kind of inherently more complex in some ways than others. So that's going to be a sort of separate category. Of course, it's not like a 5th skill or anything. I mean, and it relates to the skills, so if the grammar is very complex, maybe reading and writing is difficult. Well, maybe all of the skills are going to be difficult to pull off. But the point is just that I think that if we focus on these 5 aspects, we can come to a little bit of a conclusion about what are the hardest languages within these 5 languages that we're going to talk about. But then I'm also going to throw in some tidbits about other languages to the extent that I know. And in any case, I think the criteria can be applied to any language that you might be interested in. So the hope is that if you, say, are interested in, I don't know, Farsi, you can take a look at the things that we've talked about in these videos and sort of explore, different languages based on those criteria to get an understanding as to whether, it's going to be a big undertaking or it'll be actually quite simple. So I guess we can just get started. Today we're going to talk about the 2 auditory skills. Next time we'll talk about the 2 writing skills, visual skills, and then lastly grammar. But for now we're going to do the 2 auditory skills, so speaking and listening. And the way that we're going to talk about that is through phonology. So phonology is just the study of the sounds in a language and the way of articulating sounds and all of that stuff. So the quantitative way of talking about phonology would be just looking at the consonant and vowel inventories of any particular language. So if you don't know what that means, it's a kind of self-explanatory. Consonant inventory is just the whole body of all the consonants that are possible in that language. And then the vowel inventory is the same thing, but for vowels. So what we're going to do is that we're going to sort of vaguely rank languages in terms of their difficulty with regards to consonant and vowel inventories. So we'll start with the consonant inventories. I would say that the consonants are almost always the easiest to master in a new language. And the reason for that is because they tend to be much more distinct, whereas mastering vowels is the sign of a master of a language, because vowels can be just very hard to reproduce very accurately, especially when you speak quickly. in a language that has very different vowels. That's why English, I would argue that that is why English is so hard to pronounce for a lot of second language speakers. I would say that it's because the vowels are so difficult in English, and I'll go into all of this in a second, that it makes people with an accent, so to speak, stand out a lot more. Whereas with Spanish, where the vowels are much more simple, English speakers coming into Spanish actually have a challenge because in English there are so many vowels, and then in Spanish there are so few, that they almost create extra vowels when they speak in Spanish. But the point is that I think that that's why vowels tend to be harder. So as we go on with regards to phonology, I would say that languages that have more vowels rather than fewer, I'm going to rank those as being harder languages. Again, just with regards to phonology, because those sounds are harder to reproduce, as opposed to languages that have a lot of consonants. Okay, yeah, Arabic has many different sounds. Once you just get used to those, then you're pretty much golden, because Arabic does not really have a lot of vowels. So let's get into that right now. I'm going to put up some graphs, I guess, of this is from Wikipedia. They're just the charts of the consonant and vowel inventories for the 5 languages that we're going to talk about. So let's start with English, I guess. I think that's a good place to start. So I hope you see a little bit what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to go through the chart and go and say all the different consonants in English. And actually there's quite a few. By the way, this is not IPA, actually. The original chart has the IPA, International Phonetic Alphabet. It has the original little letters, because there's very particular letters to describe very specific sounds. I've taken those out because I don't want this to be a very technical video, and I've changed it for like how those things are usually spelt in English, more or less. So for example, the sh sound, like sh, it's not actually, in IPA it's not SH, but I'm going to write SH just because I think it's a little bit more clear. So you have ma, a ma, na, a na, pa, a pa, ta, a ta, cha, a cha, ka, a ka, ba, a ba, da, a da, ja, a ja, ga, a ga, fa, a fa, tha, a tha, sa, a sa, sha, a sha, ha, a ha, va, a va, tha, a tha, za, a za, ja, a ja, la, a la, ra, a ra, ya, a ya, and wa, a wa. Okay, so that was kind of a lot, but that's all. Those are all of them. There's no more real... there's some regional variants, you know. Of course, every English accent has its own particular sounds. Like, I think in Scottish they have like kind of sound, and like the R is pronounced differently. But I don't want to get too complicated. I want to give you just like a sort of standard. I think this is basically American English and British probably. So I just want to give you like a general sense. So if you count this set, you have 23 basic vowels in English. So it's kind of a lot, but it's not too many more than the other languages. So let's go to Arabic next, because that's the one that you guys are familiar with. This one is, of all the languages that we're going to talk about, it's the one that has the most original sort of separate consonants. And so here is the chart for the Arabic consonants, the consonant inventory. As you can see, I've written the actual Arabic letters for a lot of them, because some of those just have no equivalent in English, and it would be harder to even try to write them in some kind of weird way. I figured it would just be more straightforward to just write them. And but I'm going to read them again and do the sound. So you have ma, a ma, na, a na, ta, a ta, a ta, ka, a ka, a ka, a, ba, a ba, da, a da, a da, ja, a ja, ga, a ga. Note on that one. Fa, a fa, tha, a tha, sa, a sa, sa, a sa, sha, a sha, kha, a kha, ha, a ha, ha, a ha, tha, a tha, za, a za, va, a va, ra, a ra, a, la, a la, ya, a ya, wa, a wa, and ra, a ra. So there's a few things to note here. There's a few weird things on the graph that I want to point out. First, I've written qaf, tha, and the in red because in Ammiya, these sounds actually drift to some other sound. It's not that that speakers are not able to pronounce them, but usually they drift to another sound. That's why I added ga as a possible sound in the inventory, because a lot of the dialects do have this sound, even though it's not actually originally in sort of classical Arabic. Like in Egyptian, you have jim becoming ga, and in Palestinian, or especially Jordanian in the Gulf, you have qaf becoming ga. So I kind of just added that in there. And tha and the usually drift to sa and za, or even ta and da. So I counted, and sort of based on this, there's about 28 consonants in Arabic. It just kind of depends on what you count, what you don't count. But yeah, as you can see, it's about five more than English. And what's interesting is that actually there's quite a few sounds that are shared between Arabic and English which do not exist in the other languages that we're going to talk about. So for example, for an English speaker, the sound tha and the may be pretty simple actually, and not be one of the sort of most challenging letters, right? Like ta and dha and ayn and etc. But actually for speakers of like Spanish, this would be extremely challenging. All of the whole Arabic consonant inventory, because there is no sha in Spanish, although you can say it, but anyway, there's no tha, the. So this would be especially challenging for a Spanish speaker, even more than an English speaker. So why don't we go to Spanish then? So I'm kind of doing this in a random order as I sort of talk about the languages and how they relate to each other. But now I want to talk about Spanish, and I think I should have maybe drawn a little red circle around the Y and the J, and I'll tell you why in a second. So what's going on here is that in Spanish, especially in the sort of spoken Spanish, and by the way, this is more or less based on my accent in Spanish, so sorry if it's not like the most comprehensive, but letters become a little bit softer when they're in the middle of a word as opposed to in the beginning. Technically, if you want to be really, really IPA specific, those would be two different sounds, but they're what's called allophones. So allophones are just sounds that are considered the same letter, but they just do sound slightly different in different positions. But I don't really think that I want to go too deep into that, and I just want to consider them one sound because it's just simpler that way. And the things that I've written red circles around are those kind of allophonic sounds. So let's just go through it. So what I'm going to do for these ones is I'm going to say like a 2-syllable mini made-up word, just because sometimes that might actually show you where the sound becomes a little bit softer in the middle. So you have mama, nana, ñaña, papa, fafa, baba, tata, dado, sasa, lala, raro. Here there's quite a difference between ra and then ra. Ra cannot be in the beginning of a word. It's almost hard to say. The beginning R is always ra, or if you have two R's. So there's two R's in Spanish, but again here, for the purposes of this, I just want to consider it one. Then you have, let's say, cha-cha, yo-yo. So here, this might be a little bit just my accent, but this sound, when it's in the beginning, I say it more of as a ja. So yo, ya, right now, as opposed to ayer or hayamos, which is a softer kind of. So technically these would be two different sounds, and in some languages they are considered different. Like in English, you have J, the letter J, and then a your, like a y, as opposed to j sound. In Spanish, especially, you know, I'm talking about my accent, those are not considered different really. It's just about the softening in the middle. Caca, gaga, and finally, this last one is not because of the position. This one is just a accent thing. So some people say ha, and some people say ha. So, and I've written it as an H just because that's how it would be in English, but actually in Spanish this is written with a J. Don't worry about it, it doesn't matter. So a word like Javier, I wouldn't say Javier, I would say Javier. So it's not ja, it's just an H kind of sound. So that's the consonant inventory in Spanish. As you can see, it's much, much simpler than all the other ones. Notably, between Spanish and English, you don't have, in Spanish, you don't have sha, you don't have the, you don't have that, you don't have a V, actually. You write, there's a V in the alphabet, but remember, this is not the alphabet. This is the consonant inventory, so it's the sounds that are possible in English. Sure, you can have Z and V, but actually neither of those sounds exist in Spanish. So there's no, I mean, if we say it with the Arabic letter names, there's no Zain, there's no V, there's no Sheen, there's no Tha. So that's why I'm saying it could be really, really challenging. Actually, of the 5 languages that we're going to talk about today, Spanish is the one with the least consonants in its inventory, at around 16 to 18, depending on how you count. Just, you know, the R's, like if you count them as one each and whatnot. But I'm going to say 16, let's say. That's actually quite little. That's very few. But what's interesting is that actually Spanish and Japanese have a very similar consonant inventory and the same number. So Japanese actually also has only 16 to 18 consonants in its inventory, and we'll go to that next. Okay, so this is the consonant inventory for Japanese. And as you can see, it's also very simple. Again, I'm just going to go through it very quickly. Ma a ma, na a na, pa a pa, ba a ba, ta a ta, da a da, ka a ka, ga a ga, fa a fa, debatably, sa a sa, za a za, la a la, cha a cha, sha a sha, ja a ja, ha a ha, ya a ya, wa a wa. Okay, so a few things to say about this though. I've put an F and W in red because those sounds technically do exist, but Japanese is tricky in that everything exists in syllables. So actually, it's not possible to have any consonant clusters. All of the syllables that are possible in Japanese, it's almost like more than an alphabet, you have a syllabary. So all of the syllables that are possible in Japanese are, other than the 5 vowels by themselves, all of the consonants are followed by the vowels. So you have kake, ki, koku, but you don't have just k. That's not possible. The only consonant that is possible by itself is the N, actually. It's the only one. Everything else is followed by a vowel. And as it so happens, the syllables that are possible for some consonants are more limited than others. So for example, that's why I said with the letter F, there's only fu. There's only this particular F-U sound. There's no, you can say fa, fi, technically, but really that's just for foreign words. I don't really think there's any native situation where you would have an F followed by anything other than a U. So it's a very, very, very limited use. The same thing with wa. You only have wa, and that's basically it. You don't have we, wu, we. None of those are possible. Again, not possible to have it by itself either. Arguably, maybe there's wo, but that really just gets sort of smushed down to just o. I don't really think I would consider that wo really, although it might be romanized that way. I don't really think so. So those are just very, very limited. I guess they do technically exist in the consonant inventory, but I guess that's all there is to say about that. Yeah, the Y also is limited. It's only ya, yo, and you. But since it's at least 3 out of 5, I guess it kind of counts. Anyway, so the only last thing to mention about this is that the R sound is kind of a mix between an R and an L, so it sort of can go either way. So here it's written as an R. You could write it as an L, but I think it is more of an R, to be honest. Okay, and if you count, there's more or less also between 16 to 18. Yeah, there's a couple that don't exist in Spanish. You have Z and Sheen, which don't exist in Spanish. But then in Spanish, you have, for example, a difference between raro and lalo, for example, the R and the L. Whereas in Japanese, there's no real difference between those. I would say that's the main thing that Japanese is missing, sort of a distinction between R and L. But yeah, I guess the last one that we want to do now is French. Okay, so here is the consonant inventory for French, and it looks pretty similar in some ways to the English one, I would say. There's a couple of things that are missing also. I mean, none of these are going to be the same. I'll just go through them again. Ma a ma, na a na, nya a nya. There's no ñ letter, but I've written it that way because that's how it's in Spanish. But anyway, just to make that distinction, there's no actual letter like this. Pa a pa, ta a ta, ka a ka, ba a ba, da a da, ga a ga, fa a fa, sa a sa, sha a sha, va a va, za a za, ja a ja, ra a ra, la a la, ya a ya, and wa a wa. So the only thing to note here really is that the R is, the French R. Otherwise, it's pretty similar to some of the other stuff that we've mentioned. By the way, I should maybe point out that you have the Z and the J sound, which we also have in English. In English, the thing is, though, that not all of the sounds have corresponding exact letters. So when I spoke about English, I said that there is also a zh sound in English. But if you ask me, like, well, where is that? What is it? What letter is that? Well, actually, it doesn't really have a unique letter oftentimes, because the J is usually said j, not zh, even though the French J is actually zh. But the thing is here that in English you have words like measure, measure. See, so you actually do have these sounds, but you don't write them with specific letters, and that's what makes English orthography really challenging, but we're going to talk about that in the next video. So anyway, out of these in French, you have about 19. Well, they're exactly 19. Again, if you go through the really exact IPA consonant inventory with like everything, there might be a couple of more here and there, but I think that I want to focus on letters that are, one, have their own letter, are considered separate, or are just very, very prominent. There are some, in some languages, there are some little variants of the same letter, allophones, again, that are just not too significant, so I don't want to focus on them, because I don't think for a language learner that's something that they should really worry about, because it's almost like a native speaker, like, it's like once you're like at an advanced level is when you start worrying about stuff like that. Okay, so what's the verdict? For consonant inventories, who has the hardest one? Who has the easiest one? Well, sure, with the caveat that the languages that have your consonants, or the closest inventory to your own inventory, is going to be easier for you. With that caveat in mind, I would say that the easiest consonant inventories out of these 5 are Japanese and Spanish. I think just by counting you can kind of understand that. And the hardest is going to be Arabic. Now, why is Arabic hardest in this case? It's not necessarily because of the number of unique letters, but it's because it has some very unique letters that don't exist in other languages. So here's the thing. Arabic doesn't have a letter V. There's no va. There's not even a letter P in Arabic. There's no pa. So technically, if you removed 2 random letters in Arabic, and added pa and va, you would still have 28, but the thing is, pa and va are a little bit common, I would say. I mean, they're not too, they exist in French, they exist in English, pa exists in all of those, va only in French and English out of the ones that we've talked about. But in any case, I would say that adding sort of very common letters to your inventory, even though it raises the number of letters, it doesn't necessarily make it much more difficult if it's just not difficult to articulate. But the thing is that the letters in Arabic, the inventory is full of these really unique letters, which are the pharyngalized letters, for example. So ta, da, sa, va. These are kind of hard to articulate for someone who has no idea what they're doing, like in the very beginning. You also have qaf, you have ha, and ayn, for that matter. Oh, by the way, that counts as a consonant. Maybe some of us don't feel that way, but it does. So Yeah, I would say that that's why Arabic is the hardest. Not necessarily just because it has a greater volume. Because English also has a lot of consonants, but a lot of them exist in other languages pretty commonly. I think, like, for example, Ain, I think it pretty much only exists in Semitic languages to my knowledge. I could be wrong. But even among those, like in Hebrew, technically it exists, but it's not even said anymore because people can't pronounce it. So yeah, that's the verdict for consonant inventories. And now we're going to move on to talk about vowel inventories, and then I'll give a little bit of a verdict about that. Okay, so I'm going to work my way up, actually, and I'm going to talk, I guess I'm kind of giving a premature verdict because I'm going to speak about the easiest and then go to the hardest, because I also want to make some points about how vowels kind of work. So I want to say in advance that I think that the easiest languages here with regards to their vowel inventories are Arabic, Spanish, and Japanese, but you'll see now why. And then the hardest I would say is English. Now, it's actually possible that Arabic is the easiest of all, having only 3 vowels, but it's a little bit trickier than that, because in Arabic you have something that's called vowel length. So that means that some vowels are short and some vowels are long, and there's a difference between those. So if you know any Arabic, writing, of course, there's an actual way of spelling out that difference between like a wow as opposed to just dhamma, you know what I mean? So it's possible that technically Arabic only has 3 vowels, and if you want to make the distinction between short and long, you might multiply that by 2 and get 6. Still not too many. I don't really consider those different. They are different, but the articulation is the same. So the way that your mouth is shaped is the same. The only difference, the only thing that makes them distinct is their length, but not their sort of shape or, form of articulation. So that's why I'm going to keep it at 3. But the only thing is that for the Arabic dialects, you can add 2, basically, because in the dialects you have e and o also. So basically you have a, I, u, e, o in the dialect. An example of e and o would be beit and sot, so it's exactly an e and an o. So that's why I think that Arabic has the potential to be the simplest, but if you add the dialects, which you must, you get about 5 vowels. But the thing is that those vowels are the same amount, 5, as Spanish and Japanese. They don't sound the same, but we're going to go through that in a second. Okay, so what are the vowels in Spanish? If you know any Spanish, you know that it's just straight up a, e, I, o, u. It's very simple. There's no... See, in English, there's a claim that there's a, e, I, o, u, but that is not the case. There's actually way more than just those. Those are just the vowel letters. But in Spanish, the vowel letters always correspond to a very exact vowel sound, and there's no variation there at all, basically. So you have just these 5. They're not the same as Arabic in terms of their quality. They sound a little bit different, a, e, I, o, u. But still, you only have 5. So I think if for a Spanish speaker, if they were to learn Arabic, they would just have to, lightly adapt each of the vowels, and then that's it. But you don't have to learn to consider 2 similar vowel sounds separate, as you might have to do with English. And once we look at the English vowel inventory, you'll see what I mean. But as I said, this is very straightforward. Actually, as it turns out, the Japanese vowel inventory is exactly the same, and it sounds almost exactly the same. So here it is. Voila. It's exactly the same. Now, the only difference is that the U is slightly different. I'll give you an example. You have in Spanish a, e, I, o, u, and then in Japanese you have a, I, u, e, o. It's more of u as opposed to u. It's just maybe a little lighter. But anyway, it's basically the same, really. I mean, when I speak Japanese, I basically don't even have to change my pronunciation at all for most things. I just kind of speak as though I were speaking Spanish, and it really works out. So yeah, I would say that these 3, Arabic, French, and Japanese, are the easiest in terms of their vowel inventories. Next we have French, which has, a significantly greater amount already. As you can see here, Um, you know, there's a difference apparently between Parisian French and sort of French overall. That's not really something I can testify to because I guess I learned Parisian French. I mean, I didn't really know that that's what I was learning, but I guess that is it. And according to Wikipedia, again, there's 10 vowels in Parisian French and 13 in French overall. I can't really confirm or deny that, but sure. And in addition to those, you have three. Actually, you can kind of see what's in parentheses are those added ones that I guess don't exist uniquely in Parisian French. So anyway, as you can see, there's three nasal vowels also. So you have 10 plus 3. The nasal ones are just nasalized forms of vowels that are already existing. So they're not, the sort of shape of the mouth is not any different. It's just about the nasalization. So that's why I say plus 3 as opposed to just adding them in already. And then there's a fourth possible nasal vowel in, I guess, French overall. But let's stick with Parisian French. If you have 10 and then plus the 3, you have at most 13, but I don't, it's not that, again, it's not that I don't consider the nasal vowels unique or anything. They are, but the mode of articulation is the same. So I'm going to stick to that little definition. So we have about 10. It's much more. And as you can see from all the weird symbols, they're not very easy to isolate. I actually don't really know what these symbols mean. I mean, if you said, oh, say this word and that's the vowel, then I mean, I can say it, but you know, because they're just not written like that. So I don't know what all that is. But yeah, there's just many more. I would just have to speak French randomly for you to even detect them. But again, I can't really just point them out and say them in isolation. French people can't do it either because often they're just not really set in isolation. You'll see what I mean once I put up the English graph, because if you're an English speaker, you'll look at the English graph and be like, what is all of that? So yeah, that's it for French. I can't really say much more than I've said. And now, the big daddy. As for English vowels, you have this. What is all of this? Okay, sure. You have 3 different graphs for received RP, which is British English, well, like prestige British English. You have American, and then you have Australian. So obviously it's, you know, it's not like all of these are combined or anything, but nonetheless you see that there's a lot more. I don't even know how to count. I don't even know what. And so because English has so much regional diversity in terms of vowels, so there's not a lot of consonant drift, but there's a lot of vowel drift. Spanish is the opposite. Spanish has a moderate amount of consonant drift, but there's basically no vowel drift at all. So different accents don't sound obscenely different. In English, they kind of do. I mean, this doesn't even include the differences between like Southern accent and like Scottish English and like even Irish accents and, you know, all of that stuff, which you could add. You know, Indian English also has different vowels. That's why they all sound quite different, all these people from all these places. As you can see from these symbols, I mean, I don't know what they sound like in isolation because they're just not ever really said in isolation. It depends on what all is going on inside of the word. And that makes it hard. You know, the reason that makes it so hard to learn is because if you're a non-native speaker and you're trying to figure it out, you kind of can only practice by just saying those particular words, and there's nothing visually to identify those things because they're just written with the 5 vowels, A, E, I, O, U, but those can just take any form, you know. A can be a, you know, all these different possible sounds. So I'm not even gonna, I didn't even count. I'm not even gonna bother. Let's just say English is the hardest. Okay, verdict, voila, okay. English is the hardest with the vowel inventory. Anyway, I wanna make one last note. So we talked about consonant inventory, vowel inventory. That's pretty much all I wanted to talk about, but there's a little last note. there's many other features. See, there's many other features that can make phonology difficult for in like any particular language that you want to learn. So I think that you should take a look at the consonant inventory and the vowel inventory of the language that you're interested in, but there are other things to look out for. For example, tones. There are tonal languages. I don't speak any tonal language, so if I wanted to speak a tonal language, that would be quite a difficult, starting off point. If you speak a language with a tonal language, to my knowledge, the tones, are not the same across all the different tonal languages. Some have more, some have fewer, and they just don't sound exactly the same. But if you do speak a tonal language, that would maybe like set you up, prepare you a little bit to, just know how tones can change words. Whereas I really have no knowledge, and it still seems weird to me that the same syllables but with different tones would give you a different sound. A different meaning. Some claim that Japanese has tones, but fight me on this. If Japanese has tones, Spanish has tones, and I can prove that. So anyway, I don't really think that Japanese has tones. Another thing that you might want to look out for is something that's called gemination. So I'll actually mention two things, gemination and vowel length. We talked about vowel length. Arabic has vowel length, and you know what? Japanese also has vowel length. So these two languages are similar just in that regard. They both have this. If you are not familiar with vowel length, it would be weird for you to think of how just saying the vowel for a longer period of time would change the meaning of the word or just make the word unintelligible, etc., etc. That is definitely the case. That is very much the case for Japanese, because you can just have, because Japanese has such a limited consonant and vowel inventory, and the number, like the possible combinations of all of the letters in Japanese are so few. Context is very important, but also vowel length and gemination, which I'll explain in a second. So for example, tene is not the same as tene. And in fact, it's very different. So I don't think tene means anything. But the point is just that this is something that you would have to get used to if you don't speak a language that has such a thing as vowel length. Now, gemination is the repetition, I guess you would say, of a consonant, but really it's like a sort of emphatic consonant. So in Arabic, that is written actually with shadde. So the word shadde has shadde because it's, in English usually this is written with like two D's to show that something is geminated. English does not have gemination, nor does French or Spanish, arguably. But usually this is romanized with like two of the same letter. So shadde is not shadde. This is actually very important in Arabic because it can totally change the meaning of the word because form 2 verbs are actually just form 1 verbs with shadde in the middle. So there's a difference between alam and allam. So the L is sort of doubled or emphasized or strengthened, and it does produce a very different meaning. So that's important in Arabic, but Japanese also has this. So Japanese has kakkoi as opposed to kakoi. Do you see? That is important. So these languages both have that. Again, I'm just trying to give you a sense of the things that you would want to look out for if you were going to learn a new language. You should, with regards to phonology, you should look at consonant inventory, vowel inventory, if it has gemination, if it has vowel length, if it has tones. There's many other things like vowel harmony. I don't really know that much what that is, but because none of these languages have that. But they're all things to consider when you decide if a language is going to be harder or easier for you to learn. So I'm not really going to give any like real strong, hard answers, but I would say that in terms of phonology, I want to say that English is the hardest. Maybe kind of tied with Arabic, just because Arabic has a lot of those really unique consonants that can be very challenging. But overall, I want to say that English is the hardest in terms of phonology, because it also has a large consonant inventory, but it also has very, very difficult vowels. Very, very difficult for non-native speakers. Now, English is very easy in some other ways that we're going to talk about in the next couple videos, but in terms of phonology, it's very challenging. So I think the verdict of what is the hardest language in terms of phonology, so speaking and listening skills, is English. And I would say that the easiest, I think for the easiest one, I might say Japanese. I feel like it's Japanese. So Japanese and Spanish have basically the same numbers for everything. Maybe you could say that Japanese is a little bit, you know, unique in with the gemination and the vowel length with Spanish, which Spanish does not have. But the consonant inventory of Japanese has a few things that make it easier, just because some letters only appear in very particular combinations, so they're rare anyway. And there's no, what do you call it? There's no consonant clusters, so every consonant is said next to a vowel, and it kind of makes it easier to pronounce everything individually. I really think that it's the easiest out of all of these. So as you can see, it's kind of, you know, not very intuitive, because if you were just to ask what's the hardest language, a lot of people have the impression that Japanese is the hardest language out of all of these. Or, I don't know, it just, everyone asks me, oh, Japanese is so hard. But, okay, yeah, we'll get to writing. We will get to writing in the next part. But as for phonology, it's the easiest, I would say. So, yay, Japanese wins, English loser forever. Bye. And that's it. That's it for today's video. Next part is going to be about orthography, or just writing in general. And we're going to focus on, you know, reading and writing skills, how learning a language might be challenging because of those things. And lastly, for part 3, we'll talk about the sort of grammatical complexity of the languages. But that's it for today, and I'll see you next time.